You are now listening to You Heard. In today's episode of You Heard, we are continuing on with Natalya, tackling capitalism, white supremacy, and patriarchy, and how we need to heal from these three different sectors through communication. Welcome to part 2.
Religion also was a way to express yourself. And so what we were also seeing in that is that expression was even monitored, was changed. The way expression is also how you are able to process what is happening around you, right? And so it all comes back around to the same thing of communication, because the way that we communicate with each other, the way that is like how we will express with one another. And when that is controlled, when you are not able to be authentic, to be true to how you're feeling and what you're feeling, because you are in fear and a totally understandable fear, right, of the people and community around you, of your own family, of the backlash you might feel. Whereas women, right, you are in fear of the system, the patriarchy, or whoever's around you that is telling you that you are not worth it, you do not deserve different, and you shouldn't be thinking different. It's very much changing even how we are raising our children and the communities that we're having around that, and the people that we have around our kids too. It's a vicious cycle until we start talking about that. And the moral of that too, of talking about, this specifically is too, it's like, we need to empower each other and keep this conversation going, because the only way to heal is through naming what is happening. And then in that, getting your validation. Because sometimes, if you don't have a word for it, and it doesn't have to be a proper term, just like an expression, if you're not able to express, you're not validated that you're feeling what you're feeling too.
That was so powerful. And like just emphasizing on expression and what we have been told in society of what is okay in regards to how we express ourselves and what is not okay. And it could be the way that we express our femininity, the way we express our masculinity, the way that we express our belief in God or catching the spirit or whatever, or our connection with the universe, and so on and so forth. It, like you said, it is very monitored. And there were so many points that just came to my head that reminded me of like me growing up and being told, like in school, especially when I was in Catholic school, of how I should and shouldn't express myself. And one of the first things that popped into my head, was I remember we had like a music class for a couple of months that was run by one of our teachers, and we were learning hymns for a mass that was coming up for X, Y, and Z, religious holiday. And she decided to just make it a little bit more upbeat, and a little bit more fast. And we all kind of got into it, and we were like clapping and moving and stuff like that. And our principal, came in to us enjoying singing the hymn, and was so against that way of expressing worship, and was like, no, it needs to be like this very controlled, very clean cut, very pure way of singing. Like, you can't clap and you can't move and you have to stand like this and your uniform needs to look like this, and da 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 da. And I remember just feeling like after that, me and my peers, which when I was at that school, that we were all Black and brown. I was probably one of the whitest kids in my class. We just felt dead inside. It's like, well, what, first of all, we're going to church. We're a bunch of little kids. It's boring anyway. Now you're telling us these songs that we sing, we can't even enjoy singing these songs. And like, we enjoyed it so much that I can tell you that everybody in my class remembers the lyrics. And most of the people that I graduated with are not religious people. So the fact that like that moment in time where we actually enjoyed expressing ourselves in the faith was ripped away from us, because it's not how you do it. And it needs to be, again, kind of like tuned down and controlled and demure. Another example of this is when Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion came out with WAP. And the the expression of women enjoying sex. Like, what? People were so up in arms of this is disgusting. What are we teaching society? And when I sat there, so again, Instagram, thank you for social media and my algorithm, because it keeps me thinking and seeing shit that I just didn't think about. I saw a post. So again, I have a very huge Caribbean community that I follow, mainly because I am Puerto Rican and Dominican. It's a part of the Caribbean, so I relate to a lot of the cultural cues of Caribbean people. And there was a post that one of the Instagram pages that I followed that put, all these people are complaining about WAP and that women shouldn't be talking about that, but they must have never been raised on like female reggae artists. So, and they like listed a couple of them, and one of the ones that they listed was Lady Saw. Now, my mom played reggae music in our house all the time, and I was very familiar with Lady Saw and some of her music. And I remember one of her album covers is literally her with her, she's like sitting down, her legs are wide open, like straight up wide open, and all of the music is like talking about, and this is what you're gonna put in my vagina, and this is what it's gonna be like, and I'm juicy, I'm thick, my pum pum, like all of this stuff, and it's all about enjoying sex, and here's everything I got, and you're gonna enjoy it. I'm gonna sit on your face, and my ass is gonna be here, there, and third. So, and to just even think of it like that. So the idea of the patriarchy playing into it, of women shouldn't enjoy sex, shouldn't express themselves in sexual and sensual ways, shouldn't be wet, shouldn't be this, like there were tweets that were coming out of like women being wet isn't normal, like that's not medically okay, like no honey, we're supposed to be like, obviously you've been doing something wrong your whole fucking life. So like in taking it in regards to the patriarchy and how that lens created of like women aren't supposed to express themselves this way, and what they're saying is not medically correct, and we can dive into how the patriarchy controls Western medicine as well, but that's a whole other topic. Then when we're looking at the lens of like white supremacy and how that lens played a role in how some of the people were seeing it as well, is that there are cultures that are that feed into and are okay with women expressing themselves sexually, women dressing a particular way that shows off their body, that accentuates their hips, whether it's through clothes, whether it's through beading, whether it's through ceremonies that celebrate the woman body and all of the things that it does, or just femininity in general, that there is music out there, that there is dance that's out there, that there is worship that's out there. And for all of these people who are like, oh my God, WAP is terrible for our society, there are whole societies who celebrate that shit. And to be closed off to that and to think that these people are wrong for doing that is ridiculous. And again, comes to this idea of white supremacy and pureness and cleanliness and whiteness. Like that's what makes you civilized, and that's what makes you worth, anything in society. And then finally tying it to capitalism. Men sing about that shit all the time. So this is also patriarchy, but there are tons of fucking men who make a shit ton of money singing about women's bodies and what they're going to fucking do. So why is it wrong when a woman is making millions and billions of dollars off
There's
of
something
it?
that's put more alarming whenever it's a woman, and whenever we see that it's about pussy, even about like women's bodies. There's something that is absolutely like defiant almost. And it's funny because we were forced to, right, in a way, think of purity as being clean when we fucking like women's bodies specifically, like we are so dirty. You get like bodies in general get dirty too. And like stuff up like specifically about vaginas, like they fucking bleed. That's the dirtiest, and like also associating bleeding with dirtiness is not the fucking same thing. It's a natural thing that happens. Your vagina is actually like cleaning itself, right? And you can use that blood actually for a lot of healing properties for your skin. It's uninformed, like you were saying, uneducated, and it also puts in question, a clear question, especially here in Texas, the sexual education that's happening. Like Jesus Christ, like these are people who are adults who are adults well off past like the time that they probably first had sex that are saying that a woman's body should not be wet. It's like you have been performing probably non-consensual sex for a long time, and you're also partner, whoever it may be. I'm thinking about the women. God damn, I can't imagine what it'd be like to live that long and to not understand and not know my body and not to know, like, not know pleasure because someone else dictated what pleasure is for me and is supposed to tell me what pleasure is, which is goes back to that purity culture and how it ties into even like the happiness you feel in life, because pleasure is joy. And if you're not feeling that, then that also contributes to your mental health, right? So it's actually, it goes all back around to even our livelihood as women and how we're being viewed and how we're told to act and to maneuver and to move in the most unnatural of ways.
Absolutely. It reminds me of Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. It's a book. I've read it several times. And I had to read it, in college in my English class. I read it first when I was a little kid. And I didn't, I was a little kid. I didn't think anything much of it. I knew what it was about. I got it. I understood. I thought it was a good book, but reading it in college and obviously having a different perspective and different vocabulary and understanding of things really put a lot, just in place for me. And there's an excerpt in the book that addresses the way in which, now given The Bluest Eye is about the dichotomy between Black and white people during the time of slavery, or not even just during the time of slavery, even after slavery, and how Black people were allowed to live and how white people were allowed to live, and how media played a role in communication, all this other stuff. And it just showed the juxtaposition between Black and white people in that day and age. But there's an excerpt that goes into how white people were told to have sex or believed sex and pleasure was supposed to be, and how Black people were told and believed how pleasure was supposed to be. And in the excerpt of how white people had sex, it was like the girl kept her clothes on. She dressed in all white. It was like a long white nightgown. And like when they had sex, she would just pull it up just enough to like not show anything. And like didn't make any sound and, didn't show any sense of enjoyment. And, once it was done, it was done, it was over. And it's like, okay, yay, like hopefully we procreated, etc. And it was really for the man to get off than anything else. Like it had nothing to do with whether or not the woman was going to enjoy it. And then when they go into the excerpt of when the Black couple are having sex, it's passionate, it's heavy, there's sound, there's movement, there's enjoyment from both parties, and like it's expressive. And it comes back to that idea of being able to express yourself, and essentially this upholding the power of white supremacy has permeated itself so much so that it's even in our own sex lives that are for a lot of people are very intimate and are very private. And how it tells us how we should and shouldn't express ourselves and feel pleasure, because pleasure, like something like masturbation, like self-pleasure, is bad. Like why? Why is me pleasuring myself a dirty, bad thing?
Or like I can only have penetrative sex and that's the only form of sex that I'm allowed to have. Specifically speaking on the like white Christianity, which is like how it was brought over and the way that it has again suppressed like women. And also on the male side of it, holy crap. The ideas, the generational fallacies that have been ingrained into male ways of thinking too comes from this, because you, just like everyone else, are growing up in this. At some point, you have to make a choice for yourself, and you are at fault for the choices that you're continuing, especially in this day and age where we have so much access. Way too much access to play a fool at all.
Right. Absolutely. Like
Yeah.
Ignorance at this point is chosen unless you are actually like living with absolutely no smart anything, no smart TV, no smartphone, no nothing. And you're not in communication with people who have access to those kinds of things. Then yes, fine. Your ignorance is because of your situation. But there are too many people who have access to what is going on in the world and how all these different systems are put into place to allow oppression to happen, for you to sit here and think it doesn't exist. Like at this point, you are then choosing to be ignorant to how white supremacy is a thing, choosing to be ignorant how patriarchy plays a role in everything we fucking do, choosing to be ignorant to how capitalism is further perpetuating the other two and is completely destroying our economy and whole countries because we rely off of them instead of learning how to rely on ourselves and communities. Like, come on now. Like you are choosing to just play dumb.
Exactly.
And that's why we're in this situation.
I think my last point to wrap that up, because that was so beautifully said, what it comes back to is the conversation being held in multiple spaces for women and men, all who identify in that. And also to name what is happening in your life and to share what is happening as well. You may not have a name for it, or you may have been given a name. I think that we use the word weird way too fucking often to describe things. I'm guilty of that too. That is something that I actively am working on, because in the end, it's just shadowing what's actually at fault, what is happening. And it happens a lot in the women communities and female communities when something is uncomfortable. You know, the word predator is often replaced with, that was weird. That was a weird guy. That is something that where, like, if you got anything out of this too, it's start naming the things that make you uncomfortable instead of covering it up with, oh, it was, you know, he doesn't know better. This person doesn't know better, or that it's just something that happened one time. And it can be with anything, right? How someone treats you at your grocery store. It's how your professor shows preference to maybe one student over the other. It's how maybe there is a wage gap, right? There is a very much big ass fucking wage gap, right? It's at work. It's between the conversations that you're having with your own family. So I just want to leave everyone definitely with naming the things that make them uncomfortable, and then knowing that there are people out here who would like to chat with you, who want to hear you, especially as we know that this does contribute to our own mental health, specifically with women, right? Women are facing mental health disorders, mental health sort of like determinants, really, that have absolutely increased, especially during this time of isolation. We're even more isolated than before. So I did send you some resources, and I would love to just be able to explain some of those as well. But I think that sometimes unfortunately, we feel that we are alone and we're isolated, and those are the constructs and the systems that we're talking about that make you feel that way, and that lead us to remaining in isolation, and also not being able to heal from the things that we were taught, and also the things that we were taught that have an impact on how we are now currently. And it can be a lot of pressure on you as a family member, as a colleague, as a mother, as a partner. And I just want everyone to know that that's not on them solely.
Absolutely. It's healing is a community effort. Yes, there are a lot of things that you obviously have to go through on your own, because there are nuances that only you can tackle. But the support that is needed to be able to heal as an individual comes from the support that comes around you as well, and the communication that you have with those around you to be able to create boundaries, to be able to create spaces to foster self-love, so on and so forth. But I do want to give you the space to talk about you know, the articles that you did put in place and put together for this respective episode, because you're very much out there helping people give sound and words and communication and awareness to their respective experience. And as somebody who has worked with a midwife and has been, and still is very much active with their midwife. My experience with her was very much, creating a community for my experience to be able to share what we were going through, but also giving sound and words to, this is what I'm going through as someone who is pregnant. This is what I'm going through as someone who has just become a mother, or for even other mothers that are in the community. This is what I'm going through now that my kid's leaving the house for the first time. So I do want to give you that space to kind of dive into that, because like you said, giving our experiences words and vocabulary and sound and expression is important. It shouldn't be chalked up to it being weird. It shouldn't be something that is dismissed. Like, we need to stop gaslighting ourselves. We need to stop creating excuses that invalidate our experiences in order for us to either A, not process them, or B, give somebody else power because we feel that we don't have any in this situation. So the floor is yours to dive into all of the stuff that you did share and put together for today's episode.
That. I think I'm going to definitely hit on some of the ways that communication has helped change maternal health outcomes, specifically in the work that I do with the community that I'm in, and what that looks like, because the human experience, the mother experience, the parenting experience, whether or not you had, whatever form that you became a parent, right? That is a one that we are able to relate to. And one of the first things in that has really, I feel, changed the outcome of maternal health, whether it even looks at, suicide rates. Birthing 2020 Moms has put out just suicide facts, and they have a whole website dedicated to also maternal health outcomes and ways to be able to seek help as a woman and as a mother in whatever form you need to. I thought it was really interesting. So they had a report that came out that research from 2020 suggested that maternal suicide was the leading cause of death following the first year of childbirth. And just thinking about that, right, is so much to process, I feel. And also for anyone that's listening, if you know of someone who has experienced this or has gone through this, right, know that it is something that we are actively within, specifically like Houston and other cities too. We are trying to make sure that there is communication, because a lot of this comes back down to the communication leading up to your birth and after your birth. And if you have multiple children, even the process of what that looks like during pregnancies. And specifically with the work I do, because I work with moms and dads, whoever is willing or wanting to come, who are pregnant up until the first 5 years, we really look and focus at pregnancy the first 3 years, because, again, going back to some of these just really grave facts of how women are dying, and also specifically a Black female community is dying in the first 3 months postpartum. And that can be directly related back to the care that they're receiving in education during their pregnancy, right? The lack of care they're receiving, the lack of education, which literally the simplest of things, it's how to care for your body. And what we hear a lot of in terms of the differences in the care that white women are given versus Black women, it's that the white women are given the education on, here is literally a fact sheet of how to go through your pregnancy, the experiences that you're going to have. And here's a referral for someone within the community that can talk to you. And what we see on our with our Black and Latina women community is that they are just a checkbox. Their diagnostic tests are being run, and they're just told, you look good. That's it. And that is something that I can attest to with just last week, right? I had a mom who came in, she's on her first child. She's an immigrant from Honduras, and she was sent home after her first birth. We're not even talking about her her experience before birthing, but during her birth, she was sent home with an English paper that was with postpartum care instructions, and word for word, they were told her that they did not have any Spanish documents at this moment, and we're not going to be able to print any for her, and that's it. They never followed up with her. Come a week later, she has been weaning herself off of pain medication that they didn't give her instructions on how to use. And this is just one person out of the many I hear every single month. We're having babies every single month, right? So this isn't something that just happens once a year. It happens almost every day. It happens every day for people around the world, for women around the world. And that comes back to, again, like the education that we're able to share and receive, not only by being able to get services, because not everyone is able to get services like midwives and doulas. Unfortunately, I wish it was part of standard care. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about free healthcare forever, and also include the option to be able to have a midwife or a doula during that process. And even kind of derailing a little bit, but just thinking about Texas too, Houston has one birthing center or two birthing centers that do accept Medicaid on a trial basis. So that whole process to even become one of the providers within the state to be able to offer that service is so long. So again, going back to the constructs that are holding back and gatekeeping, right? Healthy pregnancies, literally gatekeeping mortality at this point. It goes back to how the capitalist construct of this is not going to make us money, so we shouldn't make it accessible. This is not going to be the most return for the human that we're taking in, essentially. And that is also what you hear in the medical care that people are receiving. The faster you're out, the faster someone's in. So no, at the end of the day, you being able to advocate for yourself, but also teaching others how to do that is what is literally going to save someone's life. And speaking back to that woman that we're helping, we're, going through with her step by step on how to report your doctor, how to change your doctor, which remember, again, these people work for you, not the other way around, even though it feels that. Yes, these people work for you, girl.
Say it again.
They do. You do not need to ask for permission before stating or changing your doctor. And that's something that a lot of immigrants don't know. And it goes back to, I'm grateful to be here. And that's a very wonderful, I think, thing to appreciate of where you are currently, but never let it go before your own livelihood. Don't put that before your own life and the lives of others around you too. And so it just comes back to breaking these stigmas too. And I'm sure that you also probably you had a whole different experience having to be at the birthing center that you were at too. So could you speak a little bit more about and how that experience changed your birth outcome for you personally, versus maybe some of the family members or friends that you had seen who had different experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can talk about this for days because for me, it was such a life-changing experience, and everything that you just said and sharing that story, gets me so emotional, especially because I went through this process a year ago. My daughter is a year and 3 months. It was essentially yesterday to me. And how amazing my experience was and how thankful and grateful I am for the midwife that I had, for the community that she created, for all of the mothers that she takes care of, and the reason why she created that community. The birthing center community, first and foremost, is predominantly a Black serving community. I mean, pretty much every single mother that I met that was from there was African American or Black in some which way, shape, or form. And that's very much done for a reason. And my midwife is a beautiful Black woman with all of this amazing power and magic. And the reason why first I chose to have a midwife is I hate hospitals. And mind you, I've never spent time in a hospital. Like I've never broke a bone. Like I didn't ever have to really go to the emergency room for anything like that, or like grew up with like family members who were always in hospitals. I just was turned off by them. And if for me, I think the root of it, and I was thinking about this recently, and it kind of just came to terms, is when I was younger, I was sexually assaulted. And when it finally was communicated to my mother, you know, you have to go through the rape kits and all of this other stuff with the doctors and so on and so forth. And it was an extremely transactional, very impersonal process. Now, mind you, I was a child. Like I was very young, probably around 10, maybe 11 years old. I don't really remember, but it was like, I was young, wasn't a teenager yet. And I remember just a bunch of doctors talking around me about what was going on and all this other stuff. And I get I was a child and maybe they felt they didn't have anything to explain to me. But the fact that they felt like they didn't have anything to explain to me, now when I look back at it, it was a very traumatizing experience in being and interacting with doctors, because I was going through all of this trauma as a child of getting these checkups that I've never had before. That adults get like pap smears and all of this stuff and freaking Q-tips and shit in my vagina at like 10, 11 years old. And no one that is doing this is comforting me or talking me through this process or anything like that, of like, here's why we're doing this. And, you know, understand because of your experience, we have to check for X, Y, and Z, whatever. So for me, I think that was a very formative moment as into why I hated hospitals. Now, fast forward to when I finally found out that I became pregnant. I knew that I didn't want to have a kid in the hospital. I didn't like it. I feel like they're very cold places. And two major factors. Factor one is I have a very close friend of mine who, when her mom got cancer, the woman was in and out of the hospital all the time. And I hated the response that doctors gave her and my friend of how they were essentially supposed to be treating her. And she had infection after infection and allergic reactions to chemo and radiation and all this other stuff. And like, it was so heartbreaking to see that they were just pumping more and more chemicals into her to stop one thing that would cause another, and then like, here's more medication that is going to help this, but it's going to cause this, and like, you're literally destroying this whole woman's system. And it was just so reactionary. And I was like, how in a very vulnerable state of giving birth to life am I going to feel comfortable with a system that creates this, like, well, there's this one thing and I'm going to feed it this, but because I fed it this, all of these other problems are now going to come into place. So that was one. And two is the reality that you just talked about, is how Western medicine, and I guess if you want to call it modern medicine, whatever you want to call it, but medicine in the United States and in the Western world, treats Black and brown people. Why the fuck would I want to invest in a system that oppresses others, that lets other people die at alarming rates? Like, there are huge disparities between, like, mortality rates between Black and white people and brown and white people. Like, what the fuck? So for me, it was like, I'm not going to, like, giving birth and being pregnant, it was very sacred to me. I am not going to have this very sacred moment be in a place or an institution that allows that. So my experience with the birthing place and with my midwife, Afua Hassan, was so intimate. We were with each other like pretty much every other week. Every month she holds group prenatals, and she brought all the mothers together, and very much like the program that you do, it is open up to she opens it up to mothers who are still breastfeeding. So if you're still breastfeeding your kid at 10, hey, so be it. Like, you're there. So it's open up to a lot of different mothers from all different walks of life. And it's also open up to the pregnant mothers at that time. So you have, as she calls it, bellies daddies and mommies. And we're all there together and we're all sharing stories. And Afua, of course, she very much guides the conversation, and she'll talk about like maintaining your relationship with your partner once you become parents, or, you know, the postpartum healing that you have to go through, or manage what it looks like managing your pain when you're actually in labor, or the kinds of questions that you should act or ask if you decide to have a hospital birth, like things like that, which was last week's episode. You know, it was informative, and like you talking about how something as simple as like pretty much an FAQ sheet and a referral makes all the freaking difference. And because I didn't go through the hospital experience, I guess I didn't think about that. Like literally, Natalya, I never had questions because my midwife informed me so much that when I would go into my prenatal appointments with her, she'd be like, okay, do you guys have any questions? And I was like, no, because you told me everything. Like there isn't anything that I could possibly think of that I'm worried about, that I'm scared about, that I don't know about, because you have walked me through this journey and has given me knowledge about things that I didn't even know about. And I've explained to her plenty of times, I learned more about myself as a woman and my body and the things that it can do because of the process that she informed me on. She informed me about so much stuff about my own like female body that I don't think I would have ever gotten if I went to a doctor. And I've been to GYNs before, and you know, I had my own my primary care doctor, and I wasn't learning shit about my body. But once I met her and went through that process, information is knowledge is power, and I had power over my process. And I think that's what's the most important thing. And to your point of like, people believing they can't change their doctors, or people believing like that, not understanding that your doctor works for you. Like, because, and Afua touches upon this in her own episode, because they have the PhD and they went to medical school and, you know, they're like high regarded in society. You don't question them. You know, you feel like lesser than, like you're on the bottom of the totem pole. And that is not the fucking case. You pay their fucking paycheck. Like the money they're bringing home to put food on the table for their ass is your money. So you need to have power in the process, whether it's because you're having a baby, because you're tackling cancer, or because you're, I don't know, you got to get a toe removed.
Exactly.
Like you
and
need to
that,
have
like,
power
last
in your
episode
process.
too, it's just so much of it really resonated with the work that we do with our moms in whatever state we get them, because sometimes we don't get the moms until they're 38 weeks, right? And pregnancy. And so it's later on, so we give them what we can. And some of them we get like this specific woman in her first week postpartum. And that was the part where, and I try not to imagine, but I know that there are women who don't get that care, and then they're sitting there wondering what's happening to their body, and they still don't know that they have a right to be able to ask questions, that they have a right to be able to express themselves. And going back to even expression, right? Birthing in itself is an expression, and you are moving through birth by expressing yourself. So even how when I say that for maternal health outcomes, education is so important. The education that I'm talking about too is knowing how to express yourself in your birth and throughout that process, because when you see a hospital birth that has not been guided or been given advice by a doula or a midwife, it is painful. It is, I've seen them happen, and the look in the mother's eyes, and then if she has a partner too, absolutely, who's not included, whatever, because of either or whatever gender roles there are in their culture, right? Or whatever roles that they have been not taught or taught at home too. And so just seeing that and knowing that the way that you express yourself through a birth can literally determine whether or not or how you live after amazes me. And it's a shame that it's literally just from being able to educate yourself on how you can move through that. And part of that stigma too is even speaking on specifically my African and my Latino immigrant families. There's a lot of stigma in the roles that are played, and also in talking about pain. And the pain part of it really kills me, because that's how you measure what's happening. When your body is telling you that you are in pain, pay attention to it. And oftentimes in these cultures, right, we're taught that
Right.
you need to push through the pain. And that comes back to the patriarchy leading this shit when they're not the ones pushing out the fucking baby. And it really does like change the way that you even feel. Like postpartum depression is such a fucking thing. Such a thing. And so how your birthing experience goes, then again, it's a cycle. Then change how you feel about yourself as a parent. If you feel like you are able to parent during that period, and if you don't have the support to express yourself, that is where the maternal suicide part comes in. And it really does break my heart. And I'm also very grateful. And I love that I'm able to chat with women weekly. Part of the communication part, like why I even started thinking about this. So we host Spanish and English classes every week since on Zoom since the pandemic really started. And that is something that has been really cool to be able to do, to one, teach people who hadn't been using Zoom or really like their emails even, right? Something that I feel like take for granted, and think that it comes so automatic, to be able to like attend these classes. And so these women have been showing up in the same space for a year now, getting counseling and psychoeducational classes, which can look like how to check in with yourself. What milestone should my child reach? How to communicate with my child, and then how to co-parent with someone I'm not cohabitating with. These type of like kind of conversations that sometimes don't happen, depending on your culture, depending on the relationship you have with your family, right? They're happening in this online space, and the feedback that we're getting has been like amazing and tremendous, and just like further proves how much communication changes your livelihood and also changes your opinion on what you deserve. And for another example, one of the classes that we've had where we were showing people or telling people, like these are some mindfulness activities you can do with yourself to check in on how you feel, because girl, being a parent is not fucking easy. There are days where you're like, are you sure you're my child, or are you a demon? I'm not sure, you're testing me. So it's not easy at all, right? But and especially if you're coming from or in a relationship even that is controlling, or where you're not able to express yourself. So this woman comes up to us and is telling us that she was grateful for the classes on self-awareness and also identity. There was a class that we did on identity, just understanding what that means for you. She said that the first time, she's been married, and she has 5 children now, but her middle child, he's 12 years old, but he identifies as gay. And she always would see her husband bully him and call him a faggot and all of these other just really derogatory, non-accepting words that can also lead to suicide in children, which we're also seeing an increase of during this year of isolation again. And so she was just being informed to keep that in mind, even knowing that her child wasn't alone in wanting and feeling that they were suicidal. That all contributed to her advocating for herself towards her partner and saying, I will leave you if you ever say this, and we need to talk about this. And if you choose not to, then I have resources and I have a community that's going to support me in that. And right. And I was just like, girl, I was crying. I was
That's
like,
beautiful.
I was like, please, under my mask, just like so sweaty and crying as we were doing like a drive-through distribution. But that is just like one person, right, out of the many that are able to come to classes. And it just got me thinking about, wow, this is what it looks like when you are in a community of complete strangers who don't live with you, right? Just talking to each other, just chatting 1 hour a week.
Right.
And it amazed me that much change could have happened for her that I would have never been aware of if she would have never told us, right? So it just goes to show how drastic communication can be in health outcomes too. And it also kind of brought me to thinking too of like for my own culture too, because I'm a Latina too, like where the machismo in certain parts of these like patriarchal constructs even come from too, because like I found it interesting. I read this article of how even the word machismo, right, became something that was toxic, and how it started in America. And it started by a news anchor report done where they were saying el machismo bag, essentially deeming it toxic from that moment forward whenever the Chicano movement started. And before, machismo it was literally just a word used to describe masculinity. It was not a word that was described like toxic masculinity. That's something that's new. But I thought that was interesting because, you know, what is like toxic masculinity? It goes back to the patriarchy, like white supremacy. It's these constructs that are oppressing certain groups of people. But I started thinking about that too, because here in Houston, we have a huge Latino population too. And so I was thinking about, wow, so if we are able to communicate, be in communication with the community around us, like what does that look like in our own lives? And how can that change the community around us, the people around, like the neighborhood that you live into? So I'm wondering on your part too, have you ever seen, or how have you seen something like toxic masculinity impact your own community when it came to the way that women were able to or not able to express themselves?
I mean, I grew up in a very matriarchal community in that the act of the patriarchy, or men benefiting from the patriarchy, is what caused those women to leave, to divorce their men, to like, I'm not tolerating this. Because like, so for example, and I've mentioned this I mentioned this, but my mother mentioned this in her respective episode on the podcast of like, how my father and her were taking a break and he was only supposed to be gone for 3 weeks, and it turned into like 3 months. And why, and like never checked in on me and my mom, and his family lived upstairs from where we lived, and they never checked in on us as a family, knowing that, you know, their niece was downstairs and the wife of their brother was downstairs. And this idea of like women being able to take care of everything while men are able to go off and do their own thing. And when my father returned, my mom served him the divorce papers. So I like, at least for the women that I grew up around, and my grandmother's story isn't too far from my own mother's story. It was something that was definitely not tolerated. Now, does it mean that, you know, toxic masculinity and patriarchy doesn't permeate itself in other ways, just because it's something that is very much passed down in generations? Yeah, it's there. But for the most part, from my respective experiences in my circles, a lot of the women that I am surrounded by, have grown up with, that are friends or family friends, just didn't tolerate it. And it was more of like, maybe it was expected from other family members for them to tolerate it. So that is how I've seen it. I have family members who, like, their mothers expected them to stay in the marriage because that's what you're supposed to do. And, you know, let him do whatever he wants while you're miserable, but you have to keep the marriage together. Or just like, again, it's this idea of like men having freedom to do whatever they please while you're miserable by their side. And that miserableness it also affects the way that you parent if you have kids, or the way that you see yourself and the way that you carry yourself. And you have different parts of society, or your own respective family or community, that are telling you like, suck it up because you have a sense of security because you have a man, or you have a sense of security because you're married and your kids need their father in their life. And it's like, honey, the father could choose whether or not he wants to be there if you guys are divorced or you guys are broken up or whatever it is. And in the most part, for my respective community, the fathers weren't fucking there. And again, so if we want to talk about how like the patriarchy played that, like, yes, the women chose to leave, but the men also chose to leave because it's like, well, the woman could take care of it. I have relieved myself of my fatherly duties because I am no longer attached to this woman. So the kid doesn't matter either. So it's very much this idea in the community that I grew up in that, again, men have this sense of and are given this freedom that women don't have. Women take responsibility of everything. They have to sacrifice everything when they have little to nothing within themselves. And they fucking make, whole gardens out of seeds. Like, and they're the water, they're the soil, they're the sun, and men are just out there, I don't know, doing their own thing. So that's the kind of community that I grew up in, of just women just being badass because men weren't shit.
Like I had a totally different experience growing up where my parents were like, they're still married, they're together, and there was a sense of my mom felt like she owed something to my father regardless of what's happening around her. And it was interesting because it wasn't for her, it wasn't financial stability that she found. It was a sense of emotional false stability that she found, of this narrative that she had been fed of, if you are to become a godly whole woman, you should stay in your marriage and you need to make it work. It is your duty. It is on you to be a good mother, to be a good wife, and to also, worship in the way that she was taught. And so it's really interesting too, to bring it back to myself even, and seeing and how that has affected relationships, or even like the role that I played as a parent figure with my younger sister who's 8, how I've transformed essentially. I think when she was born, obviously she's not my child by birth, but very much she changed my life. She shaped the way that I thought of myself and started treating myself. And what I do hear commonly from parents is like how, specifically like women, it's like how much of when their child is born or their pregnancy, how that formed for them like power and what that meant, and like how it made them more self-aware. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're ready or wanting to deal with what that means, what that brings you, but it is there. So I wanted to bring that up because I think that it's so interesting that everyone has their own story with that, whether or not the effects or the causes are the same. But even hearing from other people who have similar stories as you, who can identify, who can relate to you, right? What that looks like in form of like inspiration, that there are people who came before you and there are people who come after you who will go through these things. It's just about finding and hearing from those folks too.
Yeah. And it comes all down to communication and how communication fosters knowledge, and knowledge is power. Whether we're talking about, entering motherhood or, dismantling the patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy. It's understanding it at its core, the FAQs, the frequently asked questions, those questions being answered, and what you're going to do with that knowledge to, how, like you presented earlier on in this episode, how you process yourself. Like that, I feel like that is such a core foundational piece of this episode and all the different topics we talked about, because we really did cover a lot. At the end of it is, how do you process yourself? And in that process, the result of it, is expression, is communication, is decisions that you're making to do or not to do something, how you see yourself, how you end up advocating for yourself and how you end up advocating for others. So the sense of the tools that you have to process yourself and how important that is to have those tools in the first place.
We are all in. And again, that you're not alone in that. I think that sometimes really overshadows the fact that there are resources out there, but it's how do I reach out to that? How do I make that like first step to even say hi, right? To initiate that journey for yourself. And it starts with the conversation at home within your own self. Like, hey, maybe it's starting that conversation while you're showering. Because I know I talk to myself hella in the shower. So whatever it may be, just start that conversation.
Yes.
And there's like a big rule of thumb that I always use with the parents that I talk to. It's if something comes up within your own body, if you feel a change, for me, my change is my left armpit starts sweating when something happens, when I get some sort of activation from whatever may be around me. Take 5 minutes starting from when you notice that your body is telling you something, and walk through it and talk through that. And in those 5 minutes, I guarantee you something will pop up.
That's so powerful. Like being able to indicate your body's like first response to whatever's going on in the environment, and then being able to like you said, just give sound and give words to what's happening, so for you to be able to process it. I need to practice that. The next time that I'm feeling some changes going on, and be like, okay, is it my armpits? Is it my knees? Is it my toe? Maybe it's my eye twitching, and be like, okay, this is a trigger. What's triggering me? What's going on? Why am I feeling like this? What caused this to happen in my body? Like, that's dope. I really appreciate that tool for myself and for the audience to just really be able to process what the fuck is going on in their life, regardless of the situation. Now that we're towards the end of the episode, Natalya, I want to give you time to leave something for the audience. It could be an affirmation, a piece of information, resources, anything that you really want the audience to walk away with.
Remember, or try to create in your communities. Create can be anything. Having a conversation, drawing with the people around you, whatever it may be, but create something with the people that you're surrounded by in whatever way is safe for you, right? We are still in a pandemic, so whatever resource you can use to do that. And in that, know that doing that really does help affirm and validate just your existence, honestly. Just having that time. We are the 5 people we surround ourselves with, right? And it's not through judgment. It's just because of the way that we as humans intake what's around us. Something else too, we were talking about advocacy today, really being able to voice your own opinions. Remember that wherever you're at, get involved in your local government. Get involved to know the district councils that you live in as well. I found it personally easier to be able to get to the right people by bothering the district councils, as well as that 2022, we got re-elections coming up. Greg Abbott got to go for sure. Just thinking about specifically for Texas, like, please show up, Texas. We showed up before.
Right.
We will show up again. And then another thing too, I talked about 2020 Moms. It's a website. They have so much information about maternal health. If you or someone else would like more information about that, go to 2020 Moms, and they are a nonprofit organization that is very much at the center right now of changing health outcomes around the nation when it comes to maternal health, and specifically for women of color. And so I cannot talk about them enough. And I love that they do trainings and have shown me so much too. And I don't even work for them. So I would definitely check that out. And then the last thing, a lot of where my heart comes from for this episode too, and my affirmation comes from a book that I recently am diving into, and it's called The Bridge Called My Back, and they're writings of radical women of color. This book, especially as for me as a white Latina, and it's not about white Latinas, right? But it's about Latina and Black women. And then also giving voice to some of those identities that feel uncommon. So if you are in the queer community, in the LGBTQ plus A community, and you are a woman of color, or you are Latina or Black, or just non-white, right? I cannot recommend this book enough. It talks about the fight against white feminism and what that means. And I've never been more seen in my life, honestly. I've already cried reading this book, but it felt like what I was telling you about how just communication, I felt like I'm being talked to, coming home to this known that I've always felt in my body was right, but didn't really have the words for. So I can't recommend that book enough to anyone out there who's searching for something to read.
You are now listening to You Heard.